سما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما. رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما. أرضى مولاه بما التزما طوبى للنفس بتقواها. رمضان زمان البركات، رمضان زمان الحسنات، رمضان مجال الصلوات تسمو بالنفس لمولاها. رمضان يكفر ما فرط من خطأ الناس وما اختلط، فعسى من عفو الله عطا لقلوب الأمة يرعاها. رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما. رمضان تجلى وابتسما.
Today is going to be different than other days. So our actual English program will be cut a bit short. We do have two special guests here today to talk about their journey and what they do. But after, we do have a one-of-a-kind program. It's called an Umsiya Qur'aniya. So back home in Iraq, Lebanon, we have reciters that just sit down on the stage and they recite Quran. We're bringing that tradition home here. So from 10 to 11, we're going to have 4 amazing reciters from Dearborn do that. But before we begin all that, I'd like to welcome my brother Ibrahim Ajami to recite some words of the Holy Quran. The Salat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
ثانية على حب حسين صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا كل شيء خلقناه بقدر وما أمرنا إلا واحدة كلمح بالبصر ولقد أهلكنا أشياعكم فهل من مدكر وكل شيء فعلوه في الزبر وكل صغير وكبير مستطر. إن المتقين في جنات ونهر في مقعد صدق عند مليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن
علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
Thank you, Ibrahim, for that beautiful recitation. If we can recite another loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad. Tonight's program is sponsored in honor of Al-Marhum Hajj Ibrahim Kamil Abu Rabi. If we can recite Surah Al-Fatiha on his behalf. Last announcement before we begin our program. So, over this past year, the UNI, the youth at the mosque, has been working tirelessly in various arenas in this mosque. One of the most important tasks we set out for ourselves is opening the bookstore. The Medina bookstore holds books not only by our esteemed scholars from Qom and Najaf and so on and so forth, bought from some in our own backyard here in Dearborn Heights. And we have two of them here. So I'd like to welcome our little sisters, Manassa and Medina Isa, to talk about their journeys in their books about the Salat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Manassa.
And my name is Medina.
About 2 years ago, we made a YouTube channel and an Instagram channel called Muslim Journeys, where we learn where we teach the Quran and du'ats from the Quran. Last year, my sister made a book with my mom called Heart to Medina, which inspired me to make a book this year called My First Ramadan, taking you guys through my journey fasting. In here, I have 2 ayahs from the Quran talking about why we fast. Me and my mom usually go on Instagram and YouTube, and we try to look for kids reciting surahs, but we can never find it. So that's why we decided to promote Islam by making a YouTube channel where kids can get inspired by our channel. There are 2 ayahs from the Quran that I'm about to say from my book. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu kutiba alaykum as-siyamu kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun.
O believers, fasting has been prescribed for you as for those before you, so you will become mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان.
Ramadan is a month in which the Quran has been revealed as a guide for humanity with clear proofs of guidance. Thank you guys all for the support. If you guys want to follow us, go on our website called
www.muslimjourneys.org.
Salawat.
Another lot salawat for the sisters, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Before we begin the lecture, I'd like to ask the brothers and sisters to move up, please, so that we can all be closer together, inshallah. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome our older brother, our mentor, our scholar, Sheikh Ahmad Cherri, with 3 lots salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. I begin in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. May the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon His final messenger Muhammad and his blessed and purified progeny. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers, dear sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's wonderful and an honor to see the 2 young sisters taking that initiative. First of all, it's not easy to go on the stage and in front of all these people and speak, so we commend them for that and for the efforts that they put at such a young age to learn the Holy Quran. It's a really big blessing if they're still in the crowd. I don't know if they're still in the crowd. There they are. Assalamu alaikum. If they're still in the crowd, and there they are, it's wonderful that you're spending this time when you're young to learn the Holy Quran. It's one of the things I wish I could have did when I was your age. As I got older, I wished that I spent those years and those hours and those minutes trying to perfect my understanding of the Holy Quran, connect with the Holy Quran. And the best part about it is that you're not just doing it, but you're sharing it with other people. Sometimes you can do a good thing and it's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if you really want to get the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you want to get the best of rewards, is that when you do good, you share it with those around you, and that's something that you're doing. So you got a new subscriber to your YouTube channel, inshallah. And I look forward to seeing everything that you write and everything that you say, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala. Continuing on with where we left off yesterday, we said that we had 25 questions. Now we have more than 25 questions thanks to yesterday's Q&A. Inshallah, we're going to gather the rest, and hopefully nobody leaves these lectures with a question unanswered, inshallah. One of the best acts that we can do, and what we said is that knowledge precedes love, is gain knowledge, seek knowledge. So the means of doing that is through questioning, through critiquing, through pondering, through reflecting. And so this is one of the best acts that can be done during these blessed nights, as well as we're told, and it's repeated in the seminary, even on Laylat al-Qadr, that one of the best acts being talab al-ilm, seeking knowledge, that even reading and seeking knowledge on the night of Qadr is superior to, for example, reciting certain ad'i. In essence, whatever is done from the heart, from a place of truly seeking nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is one of the best acts. So we don't want to leave a question unanswered, so we'll move on to question number 12, which we slightly went over in the Q&A yesterday. It is mentioned in the Holy Quran that the Jews are superior over other groups. Why was this group held above others? And why would Allah give them this high status, knowing the trouble they would make? First of all, there is no superiority over one group over the other. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He sends a messenger to a group of people, He is selecting them, He's choosing them over others. This is a natural thing that one realizes, that of course they're blessed, more blessed than those who are without that prophet. The superiority that they had isn't by virtue of them being born in a certain land or being born from Jewish parents. The superiority that they had was the fact that God sent them so many prophets. They had more prophets sent to them than any other person. And on top of that, they did not behave with these prophets in the appropriate way that one is supposed to behave with them. We have prophets that were persecuted, prophets that were insulted. We have the story of Saint Mary. We have the story of Zechariah, and all the abuse that he had to take at the hands of rabbis and so on. Again, we're talking here from a historical context. We don't want to bring history to the present. We make a distinction today between Judaism and Zionism. There are two distinct things. You can be a Christian Zionist, you can be an atheist Zionist. So we're talking about historically what the Quran reveals to us about the Jews and how they behaved, not only with the prophets of God, but with God Himself. And so they were chosen in the sense that they were sent more prophets than other individuals. For on one hand, that's an example for us, because we see a trend in the Jewish faith in which things delved into law. It's a faith that focuses a lot on jurisprudential principles, meaning on the laws of halal and haram, on what you can do and what you can't do, and on ritual. And it loses the essence of faith, is lost in the laws. One can dedicate their entire life to those laws, and they lose sight of the laws being a means to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we find that when Jesus was sent, He was sent sort of to balance things out, to bring a balance, to relax those laws and focus on the concept of, for example, esotericism, which is spirituality, the inner aspect of faith, and love. Because that was lost. Religion becomes dry when it becomes just legal. And we can have that relationship with God in our own personal lives. So we can look at what took place with the Jews and take lesson from that. All these stories mentioned in the Quran are for us to take wisdom from, and apply certain principles practically in our lives as Muslims. So when we look at the Jewish experience that's described to us in many places in the Holy Quran, we're supposed to learn how not to fall into those mistakes time and time again. Not to have that dry relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not to focus on the word of the law, but rather to look towards the spirit. We also see this in the interaction between Nabi Musa alayhi salam and Al-Khidr alayhi salam. I remember when I went over these verses, going to several of my teachers in Qum and asking them about these verses. It was fascinating for me that Nabi Musa alayhi salam, with his interaction with Al-Khidr, in which he did not know the reasons behind those actions and he reacted in such a negative way. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want us to know that story? What is there to take from it? In essence, is that there is an inner aspect to faith. It's not just a matter of having a mechanical relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or to focus on the law, but to consider the effects on what those laws are pointing towards, that those laws don't become the ends, they become the means. Yes, we all have to abide by the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, avoid the muharramat and do our wajibat, but that's not what religion just came to give us some sort of order and some sort of rules that we have to follow. But they're supposed to take us somewhere and lead us someplace. And so their superiority is only with regards that they were sent more prophets. And that's also an indicator, by the way, of the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tried to give them many chances to reform, many chances to change, sending them multiple guides in order for them to change their ways. And yet we find Moses, at the end of the day, when asking them to enter Jerusalem after their persecution in Egypt, they said, "O Moses, go you and your Lord and fight them. We will be waiting here." And then Moses, he proclaims to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "Oh Allah, I have no one but myself and my brother." That all that group that he just saved from the Pharaoh, they left him at the final moment. When push came to shove, when they were challenged. Because faith is shown when you're put through challenges. That's when it matters. It doesn't matter that we just worship when we are relaxed and when it's easy for us. It's when we are challenged, that's when the sincerity shows. And when they were challenged and he performed one of the greatest miracles for them, Musa alayhi salam says, he has nobody but himself and his brother. Complains to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which is another lesson for us, that we will be challenged in the same ways as people of faith who proclaim to have faith and love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we will be challenged in very harsh ways. Will we also abandon the path? Will we also say to our Imam alayhi salam that you go and you deal with these problems, or will we take initiative? So the lessons are there for us to take, the history is there for us to take lessons from, inshallah. 13. How do you feel about doing the katb kitab and waiting a year for the wedding? Is that too long of an engagement time? This is a very, it's a case-by-case sort of thing. It really depends on the circumstances that you're in. Sometimes your circumstances will force you to wait a year. Sometimes it's worth it. For example, if you're looking to gain the satisfaction of your parents, then yeah, it's worth it. Of course it's worth it. To have the blessing of your mother, the blessing of your father for your marriage is not something that's light. Don't think that you're going to get far in life with having your parents upset at you. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And even if you succeed in any way, shape, or form, and your parents aren't okay with you, that's not really a success. It's missing something essential. You shouldn't consider yourself someone successful. And so it's important that we look at the circumstances that we're in. And yeah, and if it takes a year for the katb kitab, so be it. What's the ideal? It's a case-by-case scenario. It depends on the individuals. It's good in our day and age, considering that there are many challenges that people face when they get married, to try to take your time and get to know the individual. Don't be an individual that is guided by their emotions. Sometimes those around us place conditions on us taking time because love is blind. Love is blind. That's a fact. That's a reality. Okay? And when you are infatuated with an individual, you will no longer be able to see their faults. In time, the blessing of it is you get to see them in different states, under various circumstances, under various challenges, and through witnessing them in those states, you get to know them even better. You get to know them even better. So time is a very good thing. Take your time if need be. There's no right or wrong answer, right? So long as you're sure who you're going to marry, so long as you can try and get married in a way where your parents are happy with that individual, where with time eventually people grow on one another. They might be opposed to certain things in the beginning, and eventually they become more understanding. And like the saying goes, time heals all wounds. Time can really play a large role, but there's no yes or no. Should everybody take a year after their katb kitab? Not necessarily. It's a case-by-case scenario. Some cases it could happen quickly. Some cases it can take longer. But you should, in general, take your time and try to understand who it is that you're going to get married. Of course, anything rushed is not necessarily always good. Nobody gets into a marriage and then leaves it and will tell you that on the first month, in the first week, in the first year, they didn't think that this was going to be their one and only, and that this was going to be an amazing experience, and this was the right person. All the cases that you find in which people end up separating, when you talk to them, they'll tell you in the beginning, we didn't imagine that we were going to go through what we went through. But marriage isn't left to imagination. You don't have to imagine. If you take your time and you study the individual and you try to understand the dynamics, how they are, what they like, do you have common values? Do you share the same values? Do you share the same aspirations, right? If you come to an understanding on these things beforehand, you shouldn't be surprised. But of course, there are always cases where one thing is said and then a person changes later. But they say, حبل الكذب قصير, the rope of lying is very short. So eventually, even if they're putting up a front, even if they're lying, if you give it time, those lies will show. The hypocrisy will reveal itself. So time is very, very useful. We can take our time. There's no rush. The good thing about katb kitab and engagement is that you're halal ala ba'd. You're halal with one another. Your interactions are halal. That you can express you can express affection with one another. You can have that emotional security because there's a contract between you two before God that you are for one another. And you attempt to explore whether this is a potential reality that I can be a part of or not. Question 14. How does a person determine their capacity that they should fulfill for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially when placed with certain difficulties that block you from reaching that potential? This is in reference to previous lectures in which we said that everybody should have an understanding of their capacity. What's fascinating here is that we always talk about contentment, and we say that contentment is the key to happiness. Al-qana'a sirr al-sa'ada. Qana'a, being a qanu' person, being content with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, the wealth He's given you, the opportunities He's given you, being thankful, content. But we find ourselves that with spirituality, we're content. But with dunya, we're not content. With worldly things, we always want more. And we say that you should be dissatisfied. You should always strive to have more. Well, when it comes to religiosity, you say, Alhamdulillah, no, I pray. Alhamdulillah that I fast. Alhamdulillah that I abide by these legal obligations. And that's enough for me. I shouldn't push myself too hard. There has to be a balance. First of all, what does this dualism, what does it indicate to us? That with the world, we're not content, but with spiritual things, we're content. First of all, it's indicative of hubb al-dunya. It's indicative that we have a love for this world. We don't have a thirst for spirituality as much as we have a thirst for dunyawi things. So the lack of contentment should be when it comes to our spirituality, our spirit, our soul, our relationship with God. That prayer should leave you wanting more. You shouldn't be thinking that what I'm doing is enough. That doesn't mean that you push yourself to the edge. It means you know when to stop, but that craving is there. SubhanAllah, the craving we find is there for the dunya, but when it comes to salah, we say, that was enough. That was a good salah. I'll draw the line over here when it comes to my spirituality. How do you know your capacity? Through self-observation. You see whether you feel like your soul is constricted or it's expanding. The soul has two states. And these states, by the way, keep changing. They fluctuate. There's reasons for why they fluctuate. Sometimes you might have a very severe expansion. Like for example, during Shahr Ramadan, Laylat al-Qadr, the 10th of Muharram, certain occasions where you feel you have a newfound thirst. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes these as nafahat, divine breaths that come about in your life. And we are told to embrace them. There comes times where we feel, I can pray Salat al-Layl, I can attend Dua Kumail, I can read Dua Jawshan without being tired. I can pray the Nawafil. I want to do more. In these states, we're told that you should embrace them. When you feel that expansion within you, embrace that state. When you feel the constriction within you, the tightening of your soul, you lessen those acts. You don't force it. Yes, you try to push to a certain extent to test. You're testing the waters. Do I have presence of heart? Do I have sincerity? And that's why we mentioned when reading the Quran, one of the scholars, he says, Allama al-Tahrani, he says, if you're reading the Quran and your eye goes down to the page number to see whether when does the surah end or what page you're on because you're tired. You want to see, okay, I want to at least get this page over with. They say close the Quran right then and there. I always repeat this advice because it's important that we have a healthy relationship with the Quran. A healthy relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where we don't push ourselves to the edge, where we retire for a week, we retire for 2 weeks, and then have to start taking baby steps again to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and connect with the Holy Quran. And sometimes it's even more than 2 weeks. But that's because we've pushed ourselves beyond our capacity. We all have to have some element of self-reflection and self-knowledge. And it's okay. What is required is quality, not quantity. What is required is your heart, your sincerity, not how many pages you read. Yes, it's good to have a habit, to put a program for yourself and say, I want to read 1 page a day. I met a school teacher in Detroit. Her name is Janet. She has a very good bookstore. It's called Source Bookstore. It's good to give her a shout out during Shahr Ramadan because she's a good lady. She's a very smart lady and well known in the community. And she taught, I believe, in public school for 25 years. I always go to her to find new material to read. I like to read in multiple disciplines: history, geography, math, sociology, physics, and so on. I like to see what people are thinking, what they've discovered. I see God in all of these things. Anyways, so I went to her and I always ask her, give me a book that you recommend on a subject that I would never think of. It's like asking ChatGPT of a subject that I would never think of picking up or reading about before. And she would pick out a book and give it to me. Very well-read lady. And then she told, and because of how well-read she is, and that she runs a bookstore, and that she was a teacher for 25 years, I assumed that she must have been in this field for a very long time, and that she's an avid reader. Little do I know that she tells me that she reads 1 page a day. That's her limit. She says that that's not her limit, that's her goal. She can read more than that. But she says, I strive and I say to myself, read 1 page a day. And look how well educated she is. Look at how well read she is. If she can read more, she'll do more. But the goal for her, the constant goal has been to read at least 1 page. And you can see the profound effects of reading that 1 page has had on her. In her literacy, in her vocabulary, in her awareness. You can talk to her about any subject, whether it's politics, whether it's religion, whether it's history, whether it's the civil rights movement. She has a vast knowledge in various fields. And so we should put similar goals for ourselves. We should have a minimum goal, which we shouldn't feel bad about, which is, for example, reading 1 page of the Quran. And if we can do it collectively as a group, we can read more than 1 page. For those of you who know, for example, Sheikh Shuja Mirza in Canada, I remember in Qum, he used to have a session in his home during Shahr Ramadan, around Salat al-Subh time, where we would gather, and he has the Quran, and we would finish a juz' of the Quran, but reading 1 verse each in the circle. Each person just recites 1 verse, and you go around in a circle. And you find that in what felt to me like 10, 15 minutes, we finished a juz' of the Quran. And it didn't feel heavy. Because if you have to read 1 verse and another person read another verse, and you're 5, 6 people, it feels like you read 1 page. That in reality, you've only read 1 page of verses. But you find yourself that you finished the juz'. So I've seen within the community people who take practical steps, very smart brothers and sisters who figured it out. They built a system for themselves. I remember there was a group of brothers here who had a qada group for salah that they have qada of. In between work or whenever they had time, they would gather in the ICA in the prayer hall, and they would stand side by side, and they would dedicate half an hour to do qada prayers. But because they agreed on it together, and they did it together, and they worked collectively, they managed to do it. And they were consistent, alhamdulillah. So you have to be creative. This is how you should spend your time. These are the things that you should be thinking about. How can I get my qadr prayers done? How can I build positive habits, positive connection with the Quran, read about it more, ponder more, reflect more? What are the ways to do it? Not how I should be making $1 million and how can I get rich quick, and what are the different methods, or should I invest in crypto or NFTs and all these things. Sure, you can put effort to think about your dunya and how you want to manage it and how you want to move forward. But we cannot deny that the vast majority of religious literature places the emphasis on thinking about your akhirah, thinking about the hereafter, because at any point you might lose your life. What do you have saved up and invested for there? When you are giving sadaqah and where you're doing any act, any khair, any good deed, you can think about it in the same sense, in the same way. I have a checkings account and I have a savings account. Whatever sadaqah that I give, it didn't leave me. It's been multiplied and placed in the hereafter. We have to think about the correct investments, how we're investing our time, and how we are dividing our time in accordance with our own capacity. In order not to push ourselves too hard, we put conditions. We set realistic goals and realistic standards. Yes, we set the bare minimum as the goal. My goal is to pray Salat al-Layl, not with all the mustahabbat. Not all the mustahabbat. Just 3 rak'ahs is sufficient. 5 minutes of it is sufficient. If I could do more, I do more. If I can't, I don't feel bad about it. I move on. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Is there evidence to believe that we are living in the end times? Most hadiths explaining the end times can describe any period of time, which makes it difficult to know. This is something that we always go through, and it's something that is reminiscent of my childhood as well, because the discussion of end times is a fascinating discussion. The things that would take place and the challenges that are described. And I smile and I laugh because I always remember one incident where I was with my friend, and a dear close friend of mine called Hashim, and I was in his house, and we were reading the narration that says, and this is, I don't know what grade it was, 6th grade or 5th grade, and that said that there will come a time where men will dress like women and women will dress like men. And I remember what we were telling each other, that conversation. We said, oh yeah, that must be 2050. That must be 2150. This must be 2200. That's going to be in 100 years, in 300 years. We never imagined that such things would take place in our own day and age. Nevertheless, there are 2 ways you can approach the subject of the signs of the reappearance. First of all, there shouldn't be an obsession over them. And not every narration is for me and you. I'll share with you a glimpse of how the Marja'iyya, some of them, deal with these narrations with regards to the time of reappearance. For example, if the Imam alayhi salam is revealing a sign with regards to end times or with regards to the time of the reappearance, it doesn't always indicate that we should be just sitting back and waiting for all hell to break loose. This is not how the scholars understand it, or those who have an ability to make a difference understand it. The way that they understand it is they're indicators of where we should be. So if we have signs for the time of the reappearance that certain negative things and bad things will take place in Syria, then we have to be in Syria. This is how we understand it, because the Imam recognized that these narrations, they're available to us and they're available to the wider world, including one's enemies. So when the Imam is saying that such act is going to take place in such area, it means you have to protect yourself. It means you have to have a presence in this area. It means this area is a vital. The Imam is drawing a geostrategic map for you of what to expect and the sensitive points within the Ummah, so that you can derive a strategy from it, a tactic from it, in order to know how to navigate the events that will take place. Are we during the time of the Dhuhr or not? Who knows? Are there signs that have taken place that are very similar to that which is mentioned in narrations? Without a doubt, yes, there are. Without a doubt, yes, there are. Does that mean that time is near? Only God knows. What matters is that we fulfill our role and our responsibility regardless. By the way, Palestine can be liberated and the Imam would not have appeared. That's a very real possibility. It's not a condition that the Imam has to appear for Palestine to be liberated. Regardless of the narrations, they're not fixed in time. Some might take place, some won't take place, and there are certain signs that are definite and will take place. Like the Sufyani, like Qatl al-Nafs al-Zakiyah, like the voice that's heard from the sky, and so on. There are certain signs that are fixed. The rest of the signs, either they happen or don't happen. But why did the Imam mention them? The Imam could have mentioned the cure for cancer. So we can't be indifferent to the narrations, because the Imams are not speaking for just the sake of talking and speaking. They mention them for a reason. They're not for you and I to understand. They're for certain commanders and certain marajia and certain individuals. They look at these hadith and they know exactly what these hadith are trying to tell them and what they indicate for them. What you and I can do and what we can ask ourselves is, what can we do in order to hasten the reappearance of the Imam of our time, Abdullah Ta'ala Farajul Sharif. Question number 16. How does Islam explain near-death experiences? During Shahr Ramadan, I don't know if some of you might be Farsi speaking, there's a show in Iran during this holy month. I don't know if it's going on this year, but it used to go on every year, that interviews individuals who have near-death experiences. How does Islam explain it? Well, first of all, there has to be a system for understanding near-death experiences, whether they're legitimate, whether they're not legitimate, whether they're hallucinations, what they are. And how does it explain it? It's an individual whose soul left their body and they witnessed certain realities. And what they witnessed is a proof upon themselves, because there's no real means of validating a spiritual experience. How do you know a person that claims they saw something actually saw something? So you look for outside indicators. If they said that their soul left their body and they witnessed a conversation, or they went to another place, you try to go and you verify it. In many cases you find that case was true. Their soul did leave their body. Well, what they had as an experience is a proof upon them, something for them to take light from and something to them to take knowledge from. So is it possible to have a near-death experience and leave your body and to witness certain realities? Yes. You can also experience the same thing in your dreams. In your dream, you could witness a scenario in which your soul was taken and you entered the barzakh and so on, and you traveled and you were questioned and you had all these sort of things. Why are they there? They're there hopefully to cause some change for us, the subject of dreams and experiences. In the narrations, it's mentioned that during the time of Nabi Adam alayhi salam, people had struggled understanding metaphysics, understanding metaphysical realities, meaning spiritual realities. And they complained about angels, about the hereafter. How do we know that it's true? It's very hard for us to reach certainty. And so God gave humanity the ability to dream. Because in the dream, you're able to experience somewhat of the hereafter. You ever have a dream in which you're so invested in it and it feels so good that you're upset that you actually woke up? That's what pleasure in the hereafter is like. Because pleasures in this world, no matter what they are, they have a duration, they have a limit. They begin and then they end. Even during Shahr Ramadan, we mentioned that when you eat and you're so hungry and you're excited to eat, you eat that food and then in 5-10 minutes, it's over. You can't eat anymore. That pleasure, that feeling is over. If you take another bite of that delicious cake or that food, it doesn't taste good anymore. It will make you feel sick. But in the dream, you want it to endure. You understand the concept of infinite joy, of infinite pleasure, and a pleasure that remains and that endures. And you experience movement, you experience time in a realm that does not have the laws of physics as we know it and understand it. According to biologists, the dreams take place in 6 seconds. Some people have dreams in which they were there for 2 days. It goes against our common understanding of time and space, that there is a possibility for movement, there's a possibility for travel, there's a possibility for experience in a realm that is not bound by the laws of physics, of space and time. So if you put a camera in a room and observe somebody sleeping, they are in a fixed position. But in reality, they have traveled, they have experienced happiness and sadness and fear and all kinds of emotions, yet they are fixed. Isn't this an indicator of a greater reality in and of itself? So this is one way that we can understand these experiences that we experience as proofs upon ourselves. It's a taste for us to know what to look forward to. Is there a specific way to do dua so that it can be accepted? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, O you who believe, be careful of your duty to Allah and seek means of nearness to Him and strive hard in His way that you may be successful. This is known as the verse of wasila. Seek a means of nearness to Him. This verse of wasila is where we get tawassul from. To summarize it for you, because we're out of time, people that sit there and argue about tawassul and tawassul doesn't exist and we don't believe in tawassul and tawassul is a Shia innovation. First of all, Shias and Sunnis, we all believe in tawassul. If a Sunni goes and claims that they don't believe in tawassul, then they're an ignorant individual. Allama al-Albani, which is a Salafi scholar, has a book written on tawassul. Because tawassul, they divide it into 6 types of tawassul. Tawassul through the names of God. Tawassul through the attributes of God. Tawassul through a living being. Tawassul through a non-living being. Tawassul through a mu'adhin. Tawassul through a shaheed. There are different forms of tawassul, right? These aren't necessarily all the category titles, but these are different forms of tawassul that Muslims as a whole recognize. So they recognize that tawassul is a fixed reality because of this verse in the Holy Quran. This is called the verse of wasila. So tawassul is something Sunnis and Shias both agree upon. Where they differ is in the forms of tawassul. But nobody denies that tawassul is a Quranic concept. If somebody's debating in a corner or on TV or in this place or that place, they're ignorant. But tawassul is a fixed reality for both the Shias and the Sunnis. So to gain nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how does this verse relate to dua? There is a fixed principle in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have to repeat Himself. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in one place, that when you approach me with a means, and then he says in another place, call upon me and I will answer you. How should you as a Muslim that's reading the Quran understand that verse? Call upon me, open parenthesis, with a means, close parenthesis, and I will answer you. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have to repeat the principle that He's already established. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established a principle, a fixed principle, that when you want to approach Him with a means. So the best way to do dua is to start with tawassul bi Ismillah Azza wa Jal, with the name of God, saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim before your dua. By the way, this is the same principle in Mafadih al-Jinan. When you read any dua, including dua kumail or any dua that you find, you have to say Bismillah, salawat after it, and end it with a salawat. These are rules that all the Muslims knew. They didn't have to repeat it every time you see a dua. They already knew that this was the method that should be used. So you first start with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And then after that, you send praise upon Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And you end your dua with a salawat. You end it with a salawat. Why? Because one of the things that God will never deny and never reject is praise upon His Prophet. So you send praise upon His Prophet, and then you ask for what you need, and then you end with praise upon His Prophet. So it's like you have an envelope. The envelope is the basmala and the salawat, and you put your letter in it, and then you seal that letter with a salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على. At your service, inshallah, for further Q&A. God willing, if given the tawfiq, we will resume with our discussion on divine love starting from tomorrow, and we will leave the rest of the questions for after the session, and for the later sessions, inshallah, we'll dedicate, if there's too many, a day or two to addressing them.
زمان الحسنات رمضان مجال الصلوات تسمو بالنفس لمولاها رمضان يكفر ما فرطا من خطأ الناس وما اختلطا فعسى من عفو الله عطا لقلوب الأمة يرعاها رمضان تجلى وابتسم طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما رمضان تجلى وابتسم طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما أرضى مولاه بما التزما طوبى للنفس بتقواها رمضان زمان البركات رمضان زمان الحسنات رمضان مجال الصلوات تسمو بالنفس لمولاها رمضان يكفر ما فرطا من خطأ الناس وما اختلطا فعسى من عفو الله عطا لقلوب الأمة يرعاها رمضان تجلى وابتسم طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما رمضان تجلى وابتسم طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما أرضى مولاه بما التزما طوبى للنفس بتقواها رمضان زمان البركات رمضان زمان الحسنات رمضان مجال الصلوات تسمو بالنفس لمولاها رمضان يكفر ما فرطا من خطأ الناس وما اختلطا فعسى من عفو الله عطا لقلوب الأمة يرعاها رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما أرضى مولاه بما التزما طوبى للنفس بتقواها رمضان زمان البركات رمضان زمان الحسنات رمضان مجال الصلوات تسمو بالنفس لمولاها رمضان يكفر ما فرطا من خطأ الناس وما اختلطا فعسى من عفو الله عطا لقلوب الأمة يرعاها رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما أرضى مولاه بما التزما طوبى للنفس بتقواها رمضان زمان البركات رمضان زمان الحسنات رمضان مجال الصلوات تسمو بالنفس لمولاها رمضان يكفر ما فرطا من خطأ الناس وما اختلطا فعسى من عفو الله عطا لقلوب الأمة يرعاها رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما أرضى مولاه بما التزما طوبى للنفس بتقواها رمضان زمان البركات رمضان زمان الحسنات رمضان مجال الصلوات تسمو بالنفس لمولاها رمضان يكفر ما فرطا من خطأ الناس وما اختلطا فعسى من عفو الله عطا لقلوب الأمة يرعاها رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما أرضى مولاه بما التزما طوبى للنفس بتقواها رمضان زمان البركات رمضان زمان الحسنات رمضان مجال الصلوات تسمو بالنفس لمولاها رمضان يكفر ما فرطا من خطأ الناس وما اختلطا فعسى من عفو الله عطا لقلوب الأمة يرعاها رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما أرضى مولاه بما التزما طوبى للنفس بتقواها رمضان زمان البركات رمضان زمان الحسنات رمضان مجال الصلوات تسمو بالنفس لمولاها رمضان يكفر ما فرطا من خطأ الناس وما اختلطا فعسى من عفو الله عطا لقلوب الأمة يرعاها رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما رمضان تجلى وابتسما طوبى للعبد إذا اغتنما